Welcome to Rick's Corner, brought to you by Old School Labs, the brand I trust and the only one I put my name to. Use my code DRASIN12 on the link below.
Welcome to Rick's Corner. The man, the myth, the legend. Now on with the show.
All right, welcome to Rick's Corner. I have Mr. Doug Brignole back and Ralph Fruguglietti.
Fruguglietti.
Well, Fruguglietti, okay, I get close enough. And we're going to discuss a few things that Ralph wanted to talk about. Ralph is a discus thrower, and he's from Italy. And he has questions about his training, and he says Doug has some answers. So we'll see if Doug has the answers that I agree with.
Right.
Most likely not.
That's a wild card.
Right? So I'm going to tell you this. You're going to lead off with your questions.
All right, awesome. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for setting this up, and Doug, thank you for coming to do this.
Well, you know what, Ralph? I'm just that kind of guy.
You are that kind of guy.
And through all my pain and misery in this leg, I set it up anyway.
Yeah.
So when I get done here, you guys are going to have to give me a good foot massage.
That's the payoff.
And a pedicure.
All right. But I really do appreciate this because it's an opportunity. I've been watching a lot of the episodes that you guys have had and other episodes, and one of the things that I've noticed is that I need to turn my phone off.
Let me ask you a question. Why are Doug's veins hanging out on his arms?
I don't know, but he's awfully big right now.
Why is he so vascular?
That's why I asked him if he's getting ready to compete.
I'm just holding my breath.
You know what else do that? A glass of wine will do that.
That's right, that's what I heard.
And some sugar.
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Yeah, no one said anything about my beard.
I did. I didn't say it. I noticed it.
It's not just a Van Dyke anymore.
No.
Oh, I'll be darned.
Nope.
We're just going with a new look.
I am so sorry.
That's just temporary.
It's
It's temporary. Can't really even see it.
Well, that's another day or two you will.
Oh, it's been there 3 weeks. I trimmed it down.
Oh, okay.
I don't want a big bushy beard.
All right.
I'm doing like the landing strip.
Oh, right, yeah.
Oh, you know what's really funny? I don't want to get off subject real quick, but this girl told me, she said, "Oh, you should see me now. I have a landing strip," meaning.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, how many flights go in and out during the day?"
That's a good question. Yeah. Is it a used runway?
Is it a used runway?
Hopefully it's a private airport.
Do you serve the TWA coffee or do you serve the TWA tea?
Oh my God! Yeah.
Oh, I can go on and on. Okay, go ahead, Ralph. I'm sorry.
All right. So one of the things I noticed watching all the different episodes that you guys have, it's very focused on bodybuilding and body sculpting and just general fitness, that kind of thing. Being a discus thrower, I start automatically thinking, okay, well, how does that affect what Doug is saying and what you guys are discussing? How does that affect someone who's an athlete, a thrower, a discus thrower, a shot putter, a pole vaulter, a baseball player, quarterback, any of these things, right? We're all lifting weights. We're all trying to accomplish something. We're all trying to make muscles bigger and so on. So I had some specific questions that I kind of wanted to throw at you and just get your thoughts.
Okay, well, let me just start off with a kind of a broad, kind of a general address of that, and that is that, and I've said this to other people, that when you're bodybuilding or you're pursuing, and I have to be careful with when I say pursuing fitness, because there's so many different definitions of fitness.
Right.
Yeah.
And most people will define it in the way that they are genetically most suited, ironically enough, right?
Right.
So, but what I generally say is that the beauty of bodybuilding is that if I want to work my bicep or my pectoral muscle, all I need to care about is precisely and only what that muscle does.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not how it participates in a lot of different ways,
Right.
but what it primarily does.
Right.
So all muscles pull toward their origin. So if you have a muscle origin right here on your sternum, pectoral fiber origin, it's going to pull that arm toward it, right? So you can say, well, then the best movement for the pecs, development of the pecs, would be this movement. Would that be good for a shot putter? Not necessarily.
True.
Right? Because, like if you're a pitcher, you're going to do a motion that is somewhat unnatural, somewhat risky. In order to prepare for that, you have to simulate some of that risk,
Right. Mm-hmm.
strengthen the weakness of that risky movement, And if you do that too much, the training itself will create the injury. But if you don't train that way, then the performance of the sport will create the injury. So it gets much more complicated in terms of, in other words, everybody's got the same mechanics.
Right.
But the application is dramatically different.
Well, and also preparation for a different sport. Like, again, discus in particular, shot put, these are big, you're throwing heavy stuff type of thing. We've been doing this for
like he was doing in
years.
wrestling.
Like he was doing in wrestling.
For that I use preparation H.
Yeah. Oh, not that stuff.
That was my preparation. Preparation H for heavy. Well, let me say something.
Go ahead.
Please.
It's your show.
You hear a lot of people say over the years, I'm working out, I do the push-pull method. Well, there's no such thing as pushing.
Everything's pulling.
Everything's pulling.
Right.
And you try to explain it to them, they just look at you like, ugh.
Well, but push-pull, because in their mind, if the bar is moving away from them,
they're pushing it
it's
away.
a pushing, right?
Right,
Even
right,
though
right.
the muscles that are doing that are actually pulling.
Right.
Right.
That's exactly how I explain it.
But the premise of push-pull really was about doing all the pushing muscles on one day and all the pulling muscles on a different day. But that's even not smart because let's say triceps and chest push, theoretically, right? But the idea is I'm going to work my triceps after I've worked my pecs. Why? Because my triceps are already pre-fatigued.
Right.
So I, quote unquote, might as well finish them off. Well, you don't want to work your triceps on a might as well basis.
Yeah.
You want to work your triceps when they're fresh.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So, and by the way, if you do pecs correctly, you won't have much tricep fatigue.
Okay, well,
because the tricep should be relatively neutral during pec training.
let's start with pecs.
Okay.
All right, that was one of my first questions. One of the traditional ways that people that are throwing things do bench pressing, totally opposite of what a bodybuilder would do, a competitive weightlifter would do. You bring the bar down, and you bring it down, and you literally smack it on the chest, and you explode up, and you're thrusting your hips up. Somebody watching you do this in the gym thinking that guy has no idea what they're doing.
No idea.
Bottom line is they were training for it. So my question for you is, bench press, and I think I've watched enough of your shows now to realize that bench press is really not going to work the chest. It's going to work more your deltoids. And
I actually wouldn't even recommend it for a shot putter.
that's where I'm getting
Yeah,
at.
right.
I'm trying. This is kind of people are going to listen to this because I'm going to post this on some of the other sites and stuff that people are specifically discus, shot, hammer, and that kind of thing. So the thinking has always been this, and now this is a little different.
Well, a shot is more similar to a dumbbell
Exactly.
than it is to a barbell.
Boom.
Right? You have one object that's not connected to a long pole,
Right.
as a barbell would be. When you have a barbell, you're actually pushing laterally, and the reason you're pushing laterally is because of this connection between the two hands
Can't come in.
that allow you to do that. Right? If you were pushing laterally without that bar, the weight would fall to the side.
Right.
Right? You can get away with it because of the fact that it's attached to a bar. So you want to simulate the sport the most.
Right.
Right? And the mistake that a lot of sports coaches have made is they said you can bench press more than you can dumbbell press. Therefore, you'll be able to develop more power for your shot put. Well, no, not necessarily, because there's a lot of mechanical reasons why there's more weight going up on a barbell than two dumbbells. The question is, how much is each individual muscle working?
Right.
That's what matters. And when you're shot putting, you want to be able to make those muscles that are participating in that putting of the shot be as strong as they can be in that movement, not in combination with other muscles, etc.
So you have to practice the movement then.
Well, you certainly have to practice
Yeah,
the movement,
but
but you
you
also
add-
want to strength train with a similar mechanics.
So would you let's just say you got the shot put and you got the thing you shove the shot.
You putting the shot.
the shot.
So would you get a heavier one when you train? A little bit heavier till you get to
Yeah, it's
pretty heavy?
different training. That's part of
that
it.
Well,
Early on in the season.
yeah, I will give you a disclaimer first of all. My expertise is in mechanics. Your question just now is a little bit more physiological.
Yeah.
Right? That's more, even though you would think they're both exercise science or sports science, they're different. I speak physics. I don't get inside the muscle and say, well, how does it respond to high reps versus low? I mean, I've read and I've seen the research and all that, but if you really want to know in terms of high reps, low reps, explosiveness, plyometrics, all of these things, those are all physiological things. the exercise physiologist and the biomechanics person would get together, put their heads together, and say, here's what we should do.
Yeah. Well, in general, I think that's a good question. A lot of people have studied that and feel like there is an application for that earlier on in the season. You wouldn't want to do that in the season or the peak season because you really want to work on speed.
And that's similar to powerlifting.
Yeah, similar to powerlifting.
Right.
So basically, you're doing a bench press, which we've all done. You know, I've done my 500-pound bench press, and that's great. But bottom line is, you know, anytime someone talks about a popular or a world-class discus thrower, they're always talking about, well, gee, he benches this much or he squats this much, right? Those numbers. So watching one of your shows where I was doing exactly what you said, put my hand right here on my chest, did like I was doing a bench press holding the bar out there, and guess what? My chest is not moving. Really. It's not
because you're not pulling toward the center.
I'm not pulling toward the center.
The midline of the body.
Right, because your muscle fibers come
and
this way in the chest. And
that's what the pecs are doing. They're pulling toward the midline of the body. They're actually pulling. They're not
explain something
going linearly.
when you ladies are done.
Oh, go ahead, Rick. We're all ready
I was
for
always
you.
a good bench presser. My best is 450. I didn't do 500, but I did 455, and I would do
means
it
he's
all
stronger
the
than you.
time. He's
That's
stronger
right.
than me, but I'm much better than him. I got a lot of strength. I got size, but I never got the development in the pec that I wanted until I switched to dumbbells. And then I was up to 150-pound dumbbells, bringing them together at the top on the inclines.
Right.
Not the complete incline, but a slight incline.
Yeah.
And I started getting development then.
Yeah.
And then I would superset those with flies.
Well, Bill Pearl said the same thing. He said bench press is not good for the pecs.
No.
And this was a man who, had empirical evidence, didn't have, the expertise in physics, but he discovered that his pecs did not grow on bench press, but they did grow with dumbbells. And that's because when you're doing dumbbells, even though you're pulling less with the sum of the two dumbbells as you would with the barbell, the pecs are actually working.
You're pulling them together. They have machines now that do that, like hammer machines. And some of those, if you're pressing, it comes together.
Right.
So basically,
you get a full range of motion.
I'd rather use that anything.
I use the hammer strength for that.
Hammer strength,
for a decline like that.
Yeah.
That
Isn't that much
great.
better?
Yeah, I love it because it goes right.
Yeah,
to
and the thing
center.
that's also good about the hammer is that they're independent arms.
Yeah, exactly.
What you don't want is you don't want the two things to be connected.
Right, because then your dominant one.
Well, and also in my book I explain about how if you see two guys riding a tandem bike, they're sharing the instrument. So each influences the other, whether they know it or not, right? But if you have two guys riding side by side on separate bikes, that would be like what we call unilateral, right? Each independent arm is doing its own thing. It doesn't really know what the other arm is doing, and so each one has to do its own coordination, its own balance, its own...
Yeah, it's the same thing with pec deck. It's independent.
Right. They're independent.
And you can really bring that pec deck around where you squeeze. Now, I remember I used to take the cable for crossovers, of course.
Right.
And those always work, but if I did one at a time and I came over and I come way over, I could just feel this pec just really work in the center.
Right.
Now, a lot of people in gyms will take the cables and they'll do this. They're pressing.
Right.
They're leaning forward and pressing. They're doing it all wrong. It's a cable crossover.
Yeah.
Rotate the cross as you go, and it works your pecs much better.
Well, you want the full range of motion, primarily.
Exactly, yeah.
You want to complete the motion. That'd be like saying, is it okay to do a curl like this? No, you're better off completing the motion.
Well, then we also did 21s, though. Remember?
Yeah, well...
Half, and full.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that it relies on the idea that a muscle is going to grow on fatigue.
Yeah.
And they've discovered that it doesn't grow on fatigue. It grows on... what do they call it? Recruitment. There are more fibers that are recruited, the better. So, and part of the recruitment criteria is full range of motion.
Is there a recruitment form I can fill out that have people fill in?
So however you build that chest muscle, and I've heard you say this about, like bicep and some other movement, attached to a tendon and so on and so forth. It only does one thing, bottom line. Right. So same thing with the chest thing. If you have a chest muscle, is that muscle, because you're doing bench press and you're doing these explosive bounce back bench press and you build that muscle that way, or you do dumbbells, whatever, and that muscle is, let's say it's a 1 inch thick muscle. If they're both 1 inch thick muscles, do they respond the same way athletically, or is one being trained differently by doing?
Well, if the objective is to build muscle, you can literally lay out your criteria, your checklist of things that need to be part of the exercise. You need full range of motion, you need alignment, you need a resistance curve that's heavier at the beginning and lighter at the end, which matches the strength curve of the muscle. There's certain things that are clearly better than the alternative.
Right.
And so then you can literally narrow down and go, okay, well then these exercises qualify and those exercises don't. So I'm going to get, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to get 2 or 3 benefit on that, but I'm going to get 9 or 10 benefit on these. why bother with the 2 or the 3s? Okay, that's muscle building.
Right.
If you're sports conditioning, all of that kind of goes out the window, because what you want to most do is simulate the sport. Right? So whatever simulates the sport, even if it doesn't build muscle, is the way you need to train. Now, some people might say, well, I want both.
Right, right, of course.
I want the physique, and, well, then you're going to have to do both types of training. The problem with doing both types of training simultaneously is you only have so many hours in the day and so much energy.
Exactly.
Right? So if you do it all, you're going to end up basically compromising both a little bit.
But you kind of answered one of my other questions that I was going to ask, and that is basically more of a sport-specific movement. Like if you're, again, a discus thrower, or if you're a baseball player, you know, and you've got cables and you're working on this, and you're a discus thrower and you're working on that same movement, or shot put, all that. If you're doing that type of thing, is that a productive movement to develop the, I don't know, strength curve or whatever you want to call it in that?
Well, it depends. I think every movement, every exercise is a little different. Like, for example, sometimes you see guys in the gym with a pair of dumbbells, and they're going like this.
Sure.
Well, guess what? These dumbbells are being pulled down.
I
Right?
just saw that the other
They're not
day.
being pulled back.
I saw a guy taking dumbbells. He's walking across the floor on his feet and his hands, and using dumbbells to walk with. What in the world are you doing?
Yeah. Well, that's called a farmer carry, and that's another
And
thing.
then he was taking a barbell, just doing it standing up, straight out. Okay.
Well, look, I don't like being critical of the industry or people. People are out there trying to make a living and trying to come up with novel ways to do it. But the fact is that there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and there hasn't been a good way for the average consumer to sort of be able to weigh it,
Right.
to determine whether or not this makes sense based on certain criteria that we know are fact.
Yeah.
And so you get a guy who's doing a farmer carry, and you say, okay, well, the weight's being pulled down, his spine is being compressed, his arms are being pulled down. What bones, which are limbs, right? Which bones are horizontal or perpendicular to this downward pull? Well, the clavicles, right? So the trapezius are loaded, right? But there's no way that your biceps are loaded, your triceps are loaded, your quadriceps, your hamstrings, none of that are loaded, because the bones that operate those levers, those muscles, are straight vertical in neutral position, right? So you have to know a little bit of physics in order to evaluate these things. But if you want to strengthen the punching power, then you have to have something that pulls you in the opposite direction of your movement.
Like a cable.
Yeah.
A cable.
So take bench press, and then we can kind of move on to the next subject. So if you were doing bench press, if you're doing bar inclines, and you're doing flies, versus doing dumbbell declines and flies, would there be any difference in the development of that muscle?
Yes.
Yes, I think
It would
so.
work better doing that, right?
It would be better to do full range of motion.
Exactly.
I think you answered your own question.
I think I did, but you know what I'm doing is I also kind of want to throw it out here to Doug, and I'm saying, am I going in the right direction? Because again,
No, here's what you're doing. You're
look,
saying, please tell me I'm right.
well, because I'm doing what you said.
Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit before. You know, you had said, take a year or whatever it is, and you did
1 year of inclines.
1 year of inclines,
Nothing
didn't
but.
do anything else, and you
Right.
had the worst pecs you've ever done. I'm doing the same thing this year because it's an off year. The World Championships are in Toronto next year, so this year's kind of an off year. And I thought this would be a good time to try something different. And I've been doing it. I've got great results. I came on Rick's show in November, and I was 240, and I'm 239 right now, basically the same. I put on more size. Strength is good. Lost weight, but I'm 240 basically. So it's worked really well in my opinion. So now I'm trying to say, all right, is this something that other people out there, athletic people, would say, well, you know what, we've always done it this way, so we're going to continue to do it this way, even though you're showing them that this actually works.
Yeah.
This is something that works. It doesn't have to be strictly for bodybuilding.
In my book, there's an entire chapter dedicated to psychology and sociology.
When are you coming out with a hardcover on that?
It's my fault. We have to make sure that there's no copyright issues with any of the
Okay.
photos I'm using.
Okay.
Which means you have to re-photograph and re-illustrate a lot of the images. Anyway, but weight training, the iron game, right? It can be compared to religion and politics, right? There are a lot of really, really entrenched ideas about this stuff, right? And if you know a little bit about psychology and sociology, you know that people defend certain beliefs even in the absence of logic or science.
Right.
And then when you present them with logic and science and you prove to them this and this and this, they get very defensive because to some degree it feels as though you're trying to take away a part of their identity.
Right.
Our identities, to a large degree, are formed by our beliefs. So, you tell someone who's been bench pressing, if you ask Lee Haney or any of these guys who achieved stardom in bodybuilding, do you think bench press is productive? They do not want to believe that they spent years and years and years doing something that didn't have much payoff.
True, that's a good point.
So
Very good point.
they will defend them. They will well, look at Ronnie Coleman right now. He says, I did it because it was the price you had to pay, and I would do it all over again if I had to.
But he also did these other things.
Right, but he also did these other things, right?
Yeah.
So what I always say is, it's good to believe things, but it's also good to ask why. Right?
That's what I'm doing right now.
There are an awful lot of times throughout history where, like, for example, there was a time when humanity believed that the sun did not rotate around the earth. That it was stationary and that the sun was rotating around. Mm-hmm. And to this day, we still say the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. Well, it doesn't do that at all. Right?
We do.
We rotate,
Yeah.
right? So, and I documented this in my book where I say, in so-and-so AD, this person said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, right on down the line, and people said, no. Finally, when Copernicus came along, finally they said, well, maybe so.
Maybe so, yeah.
But it took like 2,000 years of people saying, no. Here's the logic, here's the science, here's the math. No.
Yeah.
So that's what happens in weight training, is there are people who say, you're a liar, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. What, you think you know more than Arnold?
Right.
Arnold did this.
Well, and the ultimate test is results, right? If you do something and it works, then guess what? All of a sudden, everybody's going to want
but the problem with that argument is that they say, I was Mr. Olympia. I did parallel bar dips. I did inclines.
Right.
And I would say, but that's not all you did. And the fact is, when you do 10, 12 different exercises, or even 5, 6 different exercises, you don't actually know how much each one is contributing.
True.
All you know is, this is how I look. I look good. These are the things I did. And so sometimes I say, but you also brushed your teeth along the way, didn't you?
Listen to me.
Yeah.
You go to the gym.
How much did the brushing the teeth contribute to it?
I do one tooth at a time. You go to the gym. Let's just say I used to go to the gym. I'd start with barbell curls. Then I'd do alternate dumbbells. Then I'd do seated dumbbells and one-arm concentration. In my mind, I felt I needed all of them. But I really didn't.
Right.
There was no point in it. And now when I go to the gym, if I do a preacher bench, it's on a selector. I put an easy bar and I curl, I really feel it.
Right.
If I move to one where you sit and you have to curl the
Right.
handles like this, I don't feel that at all.
Right. Well, and the thing is that there are people that, and I don't knock this, by the way, there are people who love working out. And I love working out too.
I love working out,
But
yeah.
they love the cocktail. They love going in there. Today we're going to do a little of this, and this.
Yeah.
And that's the cocktail.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? That's their mix for the day, right?
Right.
And when they're done, they go, God, that was a good workout.
I do the same thing.
Well, and that's perfectly okay. Have fun.
Yeah.
But understand that not every exercise contributes something different.
No, but I think it through the night before. I want to think things I'm going to do that
Yeah,
work
right.
out.
I used to do that on a piece of paper before the
Yeah.
workout. Here's my menu for today.
I have a book. I literally have
And here's
a
the
book.
menu.
And that book tells me what I'm doing that day.
but
It's written out.
And by the way,
It's good to keep a record.
I do. I love it.
And
Yeah.
by the way, I understand that it can be very monotonous.
Right.
To do the same one exercise all the time, right?
Well, it's
but
like
that
you-
doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't work.
It's like eating the same food all the time.
Yeah.
Because that gets old too. I'm so sick of it.
But I'll tell you
You should
what.
come and forgot.
But if you lived in a third world
I don't have a
country,
t-shirt. I can't come.
but if you lived in a third world country and that's all you had, you'd be grateful you had it.
Oh, absolutely. But I don't live in a third world country.
Yeah.
I live here in
Right.
the Sherman Oaks Estates behind the block wall
Right.
with
Right.
maids and butlers and valet and all the good food.
You know what I tell people generally is, imagine that you are a muscle. Close your eyes and imagine that you have an insertion over here and an origin over here, and you can't see that the machine is white. You can't see that this guy's facing north. You can't see anything, right? You don't know if it's a dumbbell, a bar. All you know is you're asked to contract, and by doing so, you're bending the joint that's in between the origin and the insertion, creating movement, and you know how heavy it is. You know if you're feeling fatigue. You know if it's heavier at the beginning or at the end. But that's pretty much all you know.
Right.
Right? So you the muscle, have a preference for what you would like to have happen. You would like to have the weight be heavier at the beginning because that's when you're most outstretched and stronger. And then as you get shorter, you get weaker. You want the resistance to back off, right? That's your preference. Right. So if you're doing a tricep kickback and it's getting heavier as your tricep's getting weaker, your tricep is saying, oh, this is too heavy at the end and too light at the beginning.
Yeah, it's opposite.
Right? So there is, mechanically speaking, a set of ideals, and it limits the variety. And
you know how I feel about tricep kickbacks. I like them.
But you like them because it works for you with your set of circumstances.
Yeah, but it also works if you use a cable.
Well, what I said on my show, if you bend over and you do a tricep kickback with a cable, it's the same thing as doing a push.
It's the same thing. I just like bending over.
Yeah. Hey, we're not going to tell anyone.
Okay, can we talk about squats now?
No
one's going to hear that.
I don't know why.
That's being edited out.
I mean, I just learned to train like that, and I bend over and I do one or I do two, and when I got done, they cramped on me. Or I can lay on an incline.
And is that a good thing?
Yeah, I love it.
That's not a good thing that they cramped up on you.
I mean, they get pumped, and then I lay on an incline, and they work good that way too. Then you got to drop and pick them up. I do what's most convenient.
Yeah, and you have to moderate what you do around your abilities.
There's a seated machine. I don't know if you guys have it for triceps. It has a handle, a long bar, and it goes on a rod. And you sit and you rest your arms on the pads, and you do triceps.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's almost like a skull crusher, kind of.
Well, it can.
It's kind of halfway between a skull crusher and a push down.
Yeah.
It can be if you hold the bar and go here.
Yeah.
That will duplicate a skull crusher. But I found that if I used the handles, just found this out like last week, I had a revelation in my head. If I stand up a little bit and I bring it back, but I keep my elbows about a half a foot off the pad, and I do them like this, it's like using a barbell, and I got the best pump out of it.
Yeah. And as a connoisseur of weight training, right, it's fun to experiment and try this and try that.
The funny thing is, I'll do it, then I'll see three other guys go over and do the same thing.
Yeah. But I do want to say,
then I tell them it's all wrong.
we were talking about, like if you're a boxer or you want to be a boxer and you're punching with dumbbells, then the problem is what we call alignment, right?
Right.
You're lacking the alignment that requires that the direction of movement and the direction of resistance be on the same plane.
Well, if you look at gyms years ago, Joe Palooka, I don't know why they even came to my mind, and it's the cartoons and their boxers, they had this thing against the wall with two handles and cables. Pulleys, and they were boxing, pulling those cables back, and that's a good idea. That's where the resistance was.
But when you take a medicine ball, a lot of times, people in the gym, sometimes a trainer will have a client take a medicine ball and rotate left to right.
Yeah.
But their movement is horizontal, and this resistance is vertical.
Yeah.
True. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the most fundamental premise of resistance exercise is opposition.
Yes.
An opposing resistance from the opposite direction, right? If you go left, it has to pull to the right.
It's really funny.
I've got a question. I don't want to ask it now because we're going off in a different direction. But
wait, Ralph.
Hold on to that.
All right.
I've had many relationships with women that oppose me.
But
I'm always trying to pull, and they're trying to pull the other way,
Different
and then pretty
direction.
soon the whole relationship snaps.
But the rule of opposition does not work in relationships.
It doesn't work at all. It just snaps in the middle, and that's the end of that one.
But it does work and is required. So another exercise that we see in the gym all the time is someone doing internal and external shoulder rotation.
Right.
All the time.
Guess what's holding this weight up? The bicep.
yeah.
So when you go to the left, nothing is pulling you to the right, and vice versa. And by the way, that would be like trying to do bicep and tricep in the same set. You can't pull and push at the same time because either the resistance is pulling down and you're pulling up, or the other way around, right? So when you're going in and out, make up your mind. You got to either have resistance from the outside, you pulling inside, or resistance coming from the inside, you pushing outside.
I see it all the time. They said, "Yeah, try this." Yeah, okay. Next life.
It is useless.
Squats.
Yes.
All right. Probably as far as athletes, legs, lower body, that's probably the number one thing that you really want to develop. So, saw your show and you were talking about compound movements versus doing specific isolation. And I started doing that. And I got to tell you, first of all, I mean, I've done, tons of weight with 500-600 pounds of squats 10 years ago, right? Stopped doing that. So now what I do is I just kind of go up to 315 and just do some reps just to kind of work on some stabilizers. And
he's just bragging and saying, "Oh, he just reps to 315."
No.
Yeah, I noticed
that.
No. He just casually throws that out
My
there.
point is, I used to do the heavy weights.
He's Italian.
And I changed this. And
You should see him spin a pizza.
I don't do that. People that can do that. So
Oh, so
anyway,
just because he's Italian, you're like,
I know,
look at this.
yeah,
What is this?
Yeah, he's profiled.
That's all right. That's all right. I make matzo balls.
Ah!
You know how many matzos I killed during a year just to get the balls off them?
Yeah. Oh my God. All right, go on.
So anyway, just do that, and then I switch over. Instead of going heavy, then I switch over from that, and I start doing the isolation. So I'll do the leg extensions, like you had said, do the 50, 40, 30, 20, all the way down
Right.
to 4 sets of 6, right? And I have never had my legs hurt,
Yeah.
or when you get done with everything
Right.
that we've done, when you isolate everything, feel like you're wobbly as much as this,
Yeah.
versus doing the heavy stuff like I used to do. And and I feel like I'm getting good results from it.
You look great.
The other thing
You
is,
look better than the last time.
I definitely put on size,
You have.
but I'm the exact same weight.
No,
so-
but you move
Maybe
stuff
you're less than
around.
fat then.
You move stuff
Yeah.
around.
yeah.
Well, I do want to say, now we're going to get back to what we said earlier about, whether you're, combining two different types of training
Right.
and getting a little bit of the benefit of both, but not all of either,
Right.
right? So here's the thing is like, okay, we talked about imagine you're a muscle, right? Okay, I'm going to imagine that I'm a quadricep, right? And as my job as a quadricep is primarily to extend the knee.
Okay.
One part of me, 1/4 of me, the rectus femoris, also crosses that hip joint above me and also flexes the hip. But the other 3 parts don't cross the hip, so they have nothing to do with hip flex. Oops. All they do is they extend the knee. That's all they do. So as a quadricep muscle, I have no idea, nor do I care, whether I'm extending the knee during a leg extension, during a leg press, during a squat. I'm doing the exact same thing all the
Doesn't
time.
matter. Or throwing a discus.
I'm just extending the
Yeah.
knee. That's all I do.
Yeah.
Same thing with the glute. The glute and the other hip extension muscles, the adductors and the hamstrings, they participate in hip extension, right? So when they do their thing, they don't care whether the quadricep is also working at the same time.
Right.
Okay. However, when you're using an exercise like the squat, you're using one direction of resistance for 2 levers. Well, actually 3 levers if you count the torso, but
Right.
let's just say 2 levers. But each of those 2 levers, the upper leg bone and the lower leg bone, require a slightly different direction of resistance to work optimally. Which means that the compromise is that each one works half as good. Okay, so if you want optimum quadricep loading, you apply a direction of resistance that's perpendicular to the lower leg, right? But when you're squatting, your lower leg never gets perpendicular, never gets horizontal.
No.
It only dips forward from the
Right.
neutral position by about 28 degrees.
Right.
Right? So you're only getting about 30% of the weight you could get if you allowed that shin to go lower as you would in a sissy squat. But if you did a sissy squat, look what happens to the upper leg bone. It goes more neutral, right? It goes more vertical.
Right.
Right? So what benefits the quad takes away from the glute, and what benefits the glute takes away from the quad. Because you're trying to do both, you have a compromise. So you say, well, the upper leg bone does get horizontal, it does get perpendicular to gravity, but
The upper leg.
but the lower leg bone is doubling under the femur, and this is the secondary lever
Right.
to the femur, which means it's shortening the effective length of the femur. So instead of getting the magnification that you would get with a lever that's 17, 19 inches long, you're only getting the magnification of a lever that's only like 9 inches long, which is half the magnification you'd get if you use, let's say, glute bridges or a multi-hip machine where you're able to apply the resistance all the way at the end of the femur.
Right.
And you could use the whole femur length.
Right.
Right? So what you end up doing is, because both the glute and the quadricep are being reduced in the percentage of load that they're getting, you compensate by adding more weight to the bar. But adding weight to the bar compresses the spine more.
Yeah.
So you end up paying a higher price to get the same or lesser benefit than you would with an isolation exercise for each of those 2 movements.
So is there anything to that as far as, you're basically building
Well,
the individual, the quads, the hamstring.
but
glutes,
but here's the thing. I don't mean to interrupt, but
No.
the other part of this is the sport application.
Right.
When someone talks about functional training, now you're talking about something a little different, right? So when I want to build my quads and I want to build my glutes, I don't want to be compromised by the functional adaptation. But if you're doing a sport that requires like high vertical leap, or you're doing
Right.
football on the field and you need to do powerful out of the bottom squat, then you need the neurological conflict of interest that happens when you squat. So what happens when you squat that's neurologically conflicting? You cannot activate optimally two opposing muscles. You cannot optimally load your bicep and your tricep at the same time. Right? Because of this thing called reciprocal innervation. So what happens is when you load your glutes and the other two hip extension muscles, you deactivate the hip flexor muscles. 1/4 of which is the quadricep, the rectus femoris.
Right.
Well, guess what else it participates in hip extension? The hamstring. What's opposite the hamstring? The quadricep.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a shutting down of some of the target muscles that you're trying to optimally load by using two different joint movements at the same time. If your objective is power on the field or in basketball or then you need to let your body get accustomed to that neurological conflict of interest. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that a lot of people hate squats, is because they can sort of feel, this, I don't know how to explain it. I'm going to call it anxiety. You sort of feel that sort of things are shutting down exactly when you want them to optimally fire.
Right. Well, that's kind of why I feel like doing that combination of both. I mean, I really feel like I'm getting, a great isolation as far as.
And you are. That is a good mix, but you have to understand you're not getting the best of either.
Because I did the squats first?
Yeah. Well, because you're doing them together.
At
all.
It'd be hard to do them separate, wouldn't it?
What I'm saying is, I would just go like 3 months or 6 months with just isolation.
Oh, and then
3 or 6 months with just compound.
Okay.
But when you do the just compound, you're going to get less muscle growth.
Right.
And when you do the just isolation, you're going to get less explosive power.
So really, you'd want to do the isolation in the beginning of the season, and then when you want more power, you do it.
Depending on what you're going for. If you're going for a meet.
For a meet, that's what I mean.
Then for a meet, you want to approach the event doing the compound movements because they're more functional for that.
Right.
Even if you have smaller muscle size.
Right. Okay.
But if you want like crazy quad growth, sissy squats.
Yeah.
Sissy squats with your knees going all the way to the ground.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Maybe. I mean, and someone says, well, those are really hard. It's like, well, didn't you say you squatted 400 pounds?
They are hard.
Yeah.
Well, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Because you're optimizing that lower.
What's your next question? Because we're going into
to run out of
time zone here. Yeah.
All right. Let's tell you what. Let me let's do abdominal, and then I'd like to just real quick hit on carbs and fats.
Okay.
And that type of thing. Abdominal. I know I've heard your show when you talked about the abdominal, because everything starts down here, everything moves towards down below and stuff like that. One of the things that we added, again, for specific exercise, and I think a lot of athletes do this because they're looking for this
rotation
straight through the rotation. We used to they used to call them Russian twists, where you'd lay on that, normally you do your back.
Hyperextension?
Yeah, and you lay the opposite direction, hanging over, and you take, we were doing 2 45-pound plates, and you take them and rotate, and you're extending out. Now I'm thinking to myself, I said, how good was that for my back? To just have it not protected at all, but doing that. But, you develop some serious strength through that area. So my question is that something that really can be
you'd be better off doing a torso rotation with cables.
Just cables?
Yeah, because let's just say that you're looking down at me from the ceiling. Right? And I'm holding this weight directly over me. Well, I'm at the apex, right? The highest part of this arc. Right? Which means that when I'm holding this thing, there's no rotational force. There's only me holding myself from falling back. Right. When I start to go this way, I start to work this half of the rotation range of motion, but when I get here, I'm neutral. Right. When I go this way, I'm loading this half, but only this half. Okay. Right? Yeah. So you've got a neutral point right in the middle. It's kind of like a tricep kickback, right? Yeah, you have a neutral point right in the middle. You don't want there to be either a base or an apex in the middle of the range of motion. Right. You want resistance through the entire range of motion for each side. Right.
That makes sense.
But you lose your balance too.
Not if you were standing with cables.
No, if you're sitting back holding a barbell up, your balance is going to, and you get injured.
Yeah, well, it's just not the best way to get the positive result. Right. It's not quite as risky as you might have thought it is. Okay. Even though as you're rotating this way, the torque is increasing. right? Because you're going
Right.
from 0,
Yeah.
50%, 100% as this thing gets more horizontal,
Right.
more perpendicular to gravity.
Right.
So it's increasing the resistance primarily the time that the spine is twisting the most.
Right. Yeah. That's not. That's
You,
not
if
good.
anything, you want to stay out of that 10% of
Right.
extreme torque.
Right. Okay, so we'll do that.
Yeah.
The other question would be carbs versus fats. I listened to one of the podcasts that you guys did on that. And one thing, obviously, that's going to work great for bodybuilding and stuff like that. So my question is, does it matter if you're doing powerlifting, if you're doing something for sport, bodybuilding, whatever it is, after your workout, your lifting workout, is it true for those other athletes to have carbohydrates? You know, some you guys talked about gummy
Yeah.
bears or whatever. Would you get the same results? Is that something that's going to be helpful to someone that's doing the
Well,
heavy
the
lifting?
first thing that I would have to say, we'd have to acknowledge, is that everybody responds to carbs differently.
Differently, yeah.
You know, some people overproduce insulin, some people don't overproduce insulin.
Right.
If you're one of those people that overproduce insulin, which they say is about 25% of the population, then it'll never be good for you to have a high carb diet. It's just,
Right.
you're begging for diabetes at that point.
Right. That's another question.
But even if you are not in that 25%, I think that we as a society have tried to sort of oversimplify, you know, high carb versus low carb versus
Right.
high fat versus low fat. I hate to use the zone because I don't like brands, but I use about 1/3 to 1/3 to 1/3 of the calories. 1/3 fat, 1/3 protein, 1/3 carbs.
Okay.
And make sure that the carb sources are mostly low glycemic. So that's all. Just stay away from starches and sugars as much as possible. Eat more fruits and vegetables. Eat, you know, a fair amount of protein, even if it has saturated fat in it. Don't worry about the saturated fat. What you want to avoid are the insulin spikes.
Right.
They're now saying that most cardiovascular disease is caused by insulin spikes, more it is than fat in your diet. And this is true for me. I went from a low-fat diet with a 290 cholesterol reading to a high-fat diet, low carbohydrate diet, and a 138 cholesterol reading.
Wow.
So, and then I didn't gain any body fat.
So if you do have diabetic issues or whatever, and you can't have the carbohydrates because of the sugar and so on, would fat be the best replacement then?
Well, low glycemic carbs
Yeah.
with fat, with protein simultaneous, because like if you eat a bowl of oatmeal with no protein in it and no fat in it, you're going to get more of an insulin spike.
Right.
You add some vanilla casein protein powder in there or whey protein powder, you put some butter or ghee and some coconut oil in there, now you've got a balanced meal. Now
Yeah.
you're not going to get an insulin spike.
That's funny. That's what I had for breakfast.
Yeah.
True. And then I just was talking the other day about bulletproof coffee
Yeah, right.
with the butter and all that,
Yeah.
the MCT oil, how it burns fat and gives you
Right.
energy.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try that.
it's kind of a novel thing. But here's another example of how we have to break with tradition.
Okay, we're
Yeah, I'm just saying a lot of us, you know, we don't want to break our old habits.
Right.
Sorry.
You're breaking his habit.
no. I just think we were going way long. Anything else?
Well, we could go on.
Yeah, we could go on forever, right?
I mean,
It's an
this
endless
is-
subject.
YouTube won't handle it. I know that.
Yeah.
You can't handle the truth.
Yeah.
Well, basically just work out and eat.
Yeah, somebody commented, said, just lift heavy and eat a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that'll work.
Well,
When I started working out, I mean, I went to the YMCA. I didn't know what I was doing. I worked out with the weights and I ate and I gained for size.
Well, when we're young, when we're 20 years old, anything works.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, just kind of real quick, one of the things you guys have talked about quite a bit extensively as you get older and stuff, you got to be thinking about what you do, what you did, and what you do now with lifting. And so changing a couple of these things has really helped me as far as injury.
Yeah.
You know, my
Or
shoulder-
starting off the right way.
starting off the right way. Well, and also doing the 50, 40, 30, the warm-up that's involved. I remember when first time I did this, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what Doug's talking about here. I'm going to be dead by the time I get to the weight that I'm really going to be
Yeah.
pushing. But you know what? You were right.
Yeah.
You actually get to that weight and you're warmed up
Yeah.
and you're not tired.
You're not as tired as you thought you'd be, and
Exactly.
you get a better pump from
Right.
the heavier weight, lower reps than you otherwise would have. Yeah.
Exactly. So that made a huge difference, and I felt like I'm lifting without the concern for like lower back issues and shoulder. Those are my two main things. And I think as you get older, that's kind of one of the things you think about is shoulder and back.
I have a question for Rick, actually. How come you don't wear a pinky ring on your right hand?
Because I don't have one that fits.
Oh,
It falls off.
You'd have to have a pinky.
You gotta have a pinky to have a ring.
and on that note,
On that note, thanks Doug, thanks Ralph for being here.
thank you.
Thank
you
you very
guys
much.
for watching.
you,
That was very
appreciate it.
informative, and I think I think that We learned a lot here. It was good.
It was a good conversation.
I appreciate it. I really do.
All right.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you guys. We'll see you
Thank you.
next time on Rick's Corner. Coming up, what's today? Wednesday?
Wednesday.
I got one coming Friday you're going to like. It's real different.
Always a surprise.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed the video brought to you by Old School Labs. Use my discount code DRASIN12 on the link below at oldschoollabs.com.
Hey everyone, now you can have the Gold's Gym logo drawn by me, the artist Rick Drasin, personalized and made out to you and signed by me to frame and put on your gym wall or wherever you see fit to do so. It's a piece of bodybuilding history. It will never be duplicated again. It's the largest selling icon t-shirt logo in the world, and I'm the guy that drew it, and I will draw it for you. Just go to my website, rickdrasin.com, and order there. You can pay through PayPal, and it'll be sent out right away. And be sure to watch Rick's Corner for all the videos on bodybuilding, nutrition, fitness, pro wrestling, and anything that suits your interest as far as getting physically fit and being the best you can be from the golden era of bodybuilding.
It's Rick Drasin. He's the equalizer, baby. See you next time.